Chapter 2. The Mystics of Maharashtra. The saints are my shelter. The saints are my love. I have attained the Lord through my association with the saints. Namdev. Across the centuries, India has been singularly fortunate in having a long succession of mystic teachers through the ages. In Maharashtra alone, from the 12th to 17th centuries, over 50 known poet mystics taught the way of Bhakti, devotion, transforming the spiritual and social practices of the times and inspiring the people to live purposefully and virtuously. The tradition of these saints and mystics is known as the Bhakti Marg, path of devotion, or the Bhakti movement. It is also known as the Bhakti Sampradaya, school of devotion, or the Bhagavat Dharma, devotee's way of life. The mystics of Maharashtra were spiritual devotees first, then poets. It was the spiritual apprehension of truths incomprehensible to the intellect that poured out in their songs. Their message is remembered even today through the treasure of their songs, which have come down through the centuries and are still sung in villages and cities throughout the region and across India. Some of the poet saints composed only verses. Others wrote great philosophical works and commentaries on the scriptures, as well as poems and songs. Among the best-loved of the poet saints are Jnaneshwar, born in the 13th century and known as the pioneer of the movement; Namdev, a contemporary of Jnaneshwar, who traveled thousands of miles across India preaching the way of devotion; the 16th century Sant Eknath, a great scholar as well as a most humble and compassionate teacher; the 17th century Sant Tukaram, who, inspired by the works of the Bhakti mystics before him, took up the Bhakti path and wrote his own much-loved songs of devotion; and Samarth Ramdas, who devoted one whole chapter of his work, Dasbodh, to Bhakti. Bahinabai, one of the women mystic poets of the era, likened the contributions of these great mystics to the creation of a splendid temple. Jnaneshwar laid the foundation, on which Namdev erected the edifice. Eknath raised the standard, and Tukaram the steeple. These devotees of the one Lord came from different castes and communities, from varied backgrounds, from diverse trades and professions. Jnaneshwar was a high-caste Brahmin, Tukaram a trader, Gora Kumbar a potter, and Savta a gardener. Chokamela disposed of animal carcasses, and Nahari was first a moneylender and then a goldsmith. There were many women among the poet mystics, for example Bahinabai, Jnaneshwar's sister Muktabai, Namdev's maidservant Janabai, and Kanopatra, the daughter of a courtesan. Some of the saints were well educated and scholars, while others had a smattering of learning or no formal education at all. Some were prosperous, while others lived in poverty. Although they belonged to different strata of society, they all shared the same understanding of the real nature and purpose of life. The path to God realization could not have been smooth for many of these devotees of the Lord. Since the highly orthodox society treated harshly those of humble origin and menial profession, severe hardship and suffering were built into the fabric of many of the mystics' lives. Although once their spiritual attainments were known, some were treated with respect and even reverence. Regardless of how they were treated, their poetry indicates that hardship or luxury, disgrace or honor, were unimportant to them. They cared little for worldly comfort and respect in comparison with the refuge and delight of their devotion. In this way, they were an inspiration to their followers, showing by example that life could reward them with the greatest spiritual wealth and that they could be happy and content, even if their life appeared to be one of deprivation and tribulation. In their compositions, the Lord is depicted as their closest confidant. working side by side with his devotees, participating in all their labors, whatever their professions might be. Janabai felt that the Lord was helping her to grind wheat, to collect cow dung to use as fuel, to perform household chores, and even to comb her hair. Janjaswant was so imbued with the presence of the Lord that he could see nothing else. Seeing God in his laborers, he sang in their voice, "Oh, the Lord is carrying my plow." This sense of intimacy with God has parallels in Spanish mysticism. Stephen Clissold says in his Wisdom of the Spanish Mystics, Fray Luis, who loved to escape to the peace of the countryside, wrote, "Christ dwells in the field." Saint Teresa, busy in the convent kitchen, used to say, "The Lord walks amongst pots and pans." Tukaram in his poems indicates his experience of seeing God in everything and everywhere, even in the humblest of tasks. It was the Lord, and not the devotees, whoever they were, who was the doer of all, and it was of no significance how low or menial the chore was perceived to be. The Lord doesn't worry about high and low status. He waits for those with love and devotion. He dyed leather along with Ravidas and wove shawls with Kabir. He pruned plants with Savta Mali, and with Narhari Sonar he stoked the fire. With Chokamela he dragged dead animals away. With Janabai he collected dried cow dung fuel. The tradition of devotion and love for the one Lord that was established by these mystics has been one of the most potent influences at work amidst the people of Maharashtra. That the people of the region have been able to preserve their rich cultural and spiritual heritage is by no small measure due to the inspiring examples set by the Bhakti saints. The hearts and minds of these devotees and teachers of the Spirit were forever filled with remembrance of the divine. Their lives and works inspired hosts of others living after them to adopt the same path of devotion. The social and religious context. The profusion of mystic teachers who appeared in Maharashtra from the years 1100 to 1750 came during an era filled with misery for most Maharashtrians. A never-ending night, a centuries-long bad dream. Ceaseless wars and invasions ravaged the land, destroying peace and stability. People lived with constant anxiety and distress. The economy of the country was in shambles. The majority of the people of this part of India depended on agriculture for their livelihood. But productivity was low, and peasants could not enjoy the yield of the fields on which they slaved. A large part of their production was grabbed by the state as revenue, and by religious and other institutions as donations or dues. In this connection, the following observation of historian W. H. Moreland, 1868 to 1938, is telling. It is safe to say that a relatively large number of producers contributed half their gross income to a relatively small number of economic parasites. He, the peasant, bore the brunt of the struggle with natural forces, but he could hope to retain no appreciable portion of the produce, which was employed to maintaining a few parasites in luxury and a much greater number in a life of comparative security. The plight of the peasants became more unbearable when the crops failed on account of scanty rainfall. Another distressing factor was the rigid division of the predominantly Hindu society into various castes. Some castes were considered low, some high. People of the lower castes carried out the menial and least desirable of jobs, such as clearing filth and removing dead animals. They had to keep a certain distance from the upper castes, as it was believed that even their nearness would pollute the purity of the higher castes. They were not allowed to use the same bathing tanks or draw drinking water from the same wells. They were even prohibited from entering temples, where the higher castes worshipped. The system was discriminatory, rigid, and pernicious. Those thought to be higher in society benefited at the expense of the lower, and their privileges were disproportionate to their responsibilities. As happens again and again in history, vested interests perpetuated the system. Women, too, were looked down upon in mainstream society. They often were treated badly, prevented from participating in many religious functions, scolded without reason, and even thrashed. The worst fate for a woman was to be childless, as she was then considered inauspicious. The whole society breathed in the poisonous atmosphere of inequality, inequity, and injustice. The dominant religion of the region was Hinduism. As it was commonly practiced, emphasis was on rites and rituals, often restricted to the higher classes. The reading of sacred books written in Sanskrit, sacrificial offerings, purification ceremonies, idol worship, and pilgrimages to places considered sacred. To add further woes to the people's already heavy load, Mughal invaders entrenched themselves in all parts of the region, altering the character of the local culture. Forceful conversion was sometimes practiced, and the conquerors levied extra taxes on the local population. Even while people were experiencing harassment, suffering, and injustice, however, they flocked to the spiritual gatherings of the mystics, where they found inspiration, encouragement, and solace. The mystics' perspective gave them succor and hope. Everyone was welcomed to the congregations that gathered to hear the teachings, not only men, but also women, who were otherwise not allowed to participate in many religious functions. When people heard the songs sung in the gatherings, they became aware of their latent and natural capability to experience a higher truth open to everyone. Through the company of the mystics, people developed the courage and will to withstand adversity and seek lasting peace and happiness in a truly spiritual life. In this way, the poet saints had great positive impact on the people of the region. A language for all. In contrast to the priests and pundits of Orthodox Hinduism who used Sanskrit, a language understood only by the educated and privileged, the poet mystics delivered their message in Marathi, the local language that was spoken and understood by the masses. They did this to the great displeasure of the priestly class, who felt they had the monopoly on spirituality. Eknath points to the error in such thinking, writing, "Can we say that God created the Sanskrit language and that Marathi was created by thieves? In whatever language we praise God, our praise is equally welcome to Him, for God is Himself the creator of all languages." The use of Marathi instead of Sanskrit, as well as popular poetic meters, metaphors, and stories, helped bring the subject of spirituality from the cloister of secrecy and the exclusive province of the priests and the privileged to all people, high and low, rich and poor. It also resulted in an abundance of fine Marathi literature. In this connection, Professor W.B. Patwardhan, Marathi language and literature specialist, observes, "The whole of Marathi literature of those centuries became a literature of spiritual democracy. It breathed the air of equality, fraternity, and spiritual liberty." The Bhakti school democratized literature so that all those who felt the call of the divine muse could contribute their share in its development. The literature of the period was no longer that of a particular community or caste. It was Marathi literature, and everyone, whatever his caste, creed, trade, or profession, loved it. The poetic form in which the poet mystics communicated their teachings is called Abhang in Marathi. The word Abhang is an appropriate one for the saints' timeless hymns. It means unbroken. Without, Bhang, break, ceaseless and indestructible. Abhangs are short yet rich with meaning. Straightforward and simple, they can be easily understood by everyone. Abhangs were sung, often to the accompaniment of simple instruments, in temples, at festivals, on the road, by women as they went about their work at home, and by laborers in the fields and towns. As they appealed to the heart as well as the mind and were easily memorized, soon they were on everyone's tongue. Every line and every word of the Abhangs illustrate the forthright and exemplary personality of the mystics of that time. The people of the area, divided 100-fold on account of caste, and bearing deep-rooted distrust for each other, came together to hear the incisive and comprehensive teachings of the mystics in their colorful and memorable verses. For centuries, these devotional songs have influenced Maharashtrian culture. Even today, we can find unlettered villagers who can recite all the 5,000 Abhangs of Tukaram by heart. If someone asked, "What is the Marathi language?" they would most likely answer, "The one used in Tukaram's Abhangs." Images in the verses are often taken from everyday life. For example, Eknath speaks of love as the crop of a field. The crop of love is ready, stored so high it touches the sky. A field was found and judged fit. Only then was the seed sown. With Master's grace it easily grew. "I've been growing love for my Master," says Eknath. "Now God is the crop that fills the cosmos." Namdev compares the concentration needed for repetition of the name to that needed to carry out everyday tasks. A boy brings paper, makes a kite, and flies it in the sky. He talks with his 5 friends, but keeps his attention on the string. The mind of Namdev likewise clings to the name, just as the goldsmith is focused on his art. The village maidens take pitchers and fill them with water. They joke and laugh and even argue, but their attention is fixed on the pitchers. Says Namdev, "Listen, Trilokan, the child is lying in the cradle, but his mother, busy wherever she may be, keeps her thoughts on her child." Footnote: 5 friends, a reference to the 5 modes or faculties, indriyas, related to action: moving, grasping, speaking, eliminating, reproducing. End footnote. Using imagery from their lives and work and the world of those around them, the poet-saints of Maharashtra brought esoteric concepts to life. Narhari says, "I am your goldsmith, O God. My craft is the business of your name. Consider this body the stove on which my soul is melted into the gold of the name. With the hammer of discrimination, I pulverize anger and passion into dust. With the scissors of mind and intellect, I cut out the delicate gold of the name and steal away with it. On the pan of the scale, I weigh the name of God. I place the bag of gold on my shoulders and carry it to the other shore. Narhari the goldsmith, slave of the Lord, meditates now day and night." Footnote: the other shore, the realm of spirituality as opposed to the world. End footnote. We can learn something about the lives of saints from verses like the one above. We can also glean information about them from legends and stories, since to this day stories about the saints, their lives, and their teachings continue to be enjoyed and quoted by the people of the region. From this range of material, we can piece together simple portraits of these true bhaktas, devotees steeped in the love of God. In the following section, we discuss the lives of 8 of the best-known Maharashtrian poet saints.